Elections are won by whoever has the most votes, but to work out who that is, you have to count the votes. And as a big fan of counting things, I realized I don't know how that's done. Well, today is the day of the 2024 UK general election, and I am going to be in the room as the count happens. I'm going to see how the count is counted. Quick, any other business before we get going? I will be in New York City to do an evening of Unnecessary Detail again on Monday, August 19th. On with the show. In the UK, there is no electronic voting. Everything is done with physical pieces of paper. You get a piece of paper that looks like this. This is the one from Richmond and Northallerton. You fill in whichever candidate you want to vote for, and then that's it. You either post that in as a physical postal vote, or you have to go into a local polling station in your local area, cast your vote that way. So at the end of the day, there's just hundreds, thousands of these pieces of paper from all across this local area that need to be counted. And the reason I'm just sauntering around the town now with seemingly nothing to do is the count doesn't start until voting finishes. So I have to wait until 10 p.m. tonight, which is why I'm enjoying the sights and sounds of Northallerton. And then, once no one else is allowed to vote, the counting will begin, which gives me a moment to get suited up. We made our way over to the leisure centre that would be tonight's counting centre, and as soon as we were there, everyone wanted selfies with Count Binface. The media were lining up interviews with Count Binface. Everyone wanted a piece of Count Binface, and I was there as well. I managed to get a cheeky selfie of me with my Count Agent badge, and the reason it is cheeky, and the reason this is actually after the fact Matt talking to you right now back in my study at home, is we were not allowed to bring any filming or recording equipment into the counting centre. We were allowed phones, and there were some areas where you could take some photos and video. So we've got some footage, but it's not good footage. But yes, here it is. I was officially a count agent for the count. I was so excited, and I pretty much immediately set about doing what I assumed would be the roles of a count agent. I had pretty much unrestricted access to wander around and look at all the people who were counting the ballots. I was there to make sure it was all above board, and if I saw anything that I was worried about, I just had to raise the alarm. Not a literal alarm. I went and spoke to a very pleasant individual who was the returning agent for the entire counting room, and they would flag it up from there. And so that was it. I went about my duties of walking around and making sure people were counting correctly. I had been training for this role my entire life. And there were a few other fun bits, like if there were spoiled ballots, they would get an agent from each of the parties to come over and have a look and just confirm whether or not they should count as a vote for any one party. And that was very, very friendly. The whole thing was very collegiate. Everyone got on really well. And there wasn't that much to do until I realized all the other counting agents were doing something different. I'd assumed the role of the counting agent was to verify the sanctity, the accuracy, the precision of the vote, but I quickly realized all the other counting agents were wandering around with clipboards, because you see, the count happens in a few different steps. First of all, they just count the physical pieces of paper to make sure there's as many in the counting room as they've recorded being handed out at the polling booths. Once they've verified all the ballots are in the room, they tidy them up. They make sure they're all facing the same way. They unfold any of them. They open up all the mail-in ballots, and they remove the spoiled ballots, and all the valid ones, they haven't looked at who they're for yet, but they are neatly arranged in bundles of 25. After that, the actual counting of how many votes go to which candidate happened. But while just the kind of admin of straightening out and bundling the ballots was happening, the count agents were not just checking that the counting was happening correctly. In fact, they were pretty much ignoring that. What they were doing was going around with the clipboard and looking effectively over the shoulder of the people arranging the bits of paper, and they were looking to see who the votes were for and doing a tally. They were sampling different sections of the vote from various polling stations to get their own data of how people voted. And they were able to use that to estimate the total vote. So they were actually doing the vote count before the vote count had even happened. So the parties, the candidates, the people in the room knew the results of that election before anyone else. No one had even counted the votes yet, apart from the count agents. I realized my actual job was to do some statistical sampling to try and estimate how many votes Count Binface had in the room. But I came to this a bit late. I didn't have a clipboard. When I realized this was what was happening, I had a quick check, and the only paper I had on me was some spare pentagons. Don't ask why. It was from the how many shapes can you make from pentagons video. They were in my pocket because I'd taken a bunch to a teaching event, so I got them out and I walked around. Now, I wasn't as systematic. I went to one table and there was somewhere between 100 and 200 ballots I think I saw going through there, because they're in bundles of 25, but I wasn't paying very close attention, and I saw one vote for the count. At the same time, I was monitoring a second table, because this was quite late in the game when I realized I had to be doing this, so I was trying to do two at once. I was a bit more confident there was between 150 and 200 votes on that table. And again, I saw one vote for the count. So I took the average of both of those ranges and realized that's 2 votes I had seen for Count Binface, and I estimated 325 votes, which was about 6%, specifically 6.15%. They then later announced the total number of ballots that had come into the room, and everyone pays a lot of attention to that. The total was 48,636, and I jotted down on my Pentagon that 65.81% of the possible electorate, the people who could vote. So that's 2/3 of people who could vote did. I don't know, that feels high. I then just scaled up my 2 from 325 to the full vote count, and I got 299. So I went with that. My official prediction was Count Binface had 299 votes. Is that correct? I'll tell you at the end of the video. Fun side event, it turns out the Labour candidate for Richmond and Northallerton running against Count Binface, Tom Wilson, is a stand-up maths video viewer. So I put my part 1 video out the night before the election, and it transpires poor Tom, after a very long day of campaigning, thought they would relax at the end of the night, not think about the election, watch some YouTube. Oh, there's a new stand-up maths video, they thought. Oh, watch that. And it's me talking about Count Binface, who's running against Tom Wilson. But I got to meet Tom at the count. They were absolutely lovely. They took a lot of time to chat to me about how different things were working, which I hugely appreciated. And it was Tom who gave me some of the insight into exactly what the other count agents were doing. And I spoke to a lot of the count agents and the actual counting people as well. Everyone was super nice. And that's how I got the inside track on how it all works. Out of curiosity, now that Tom has recovered from the election, I did ask them, because we spoke a bit at the beginning of the night, but obviously they got very busy as things went on. I said, how early in the night did they know what the final vote tally was likely to be?
Hello, Matt. So we found out who the likely winner in Richmond Northallerton would be around 2 hours before it was actually announced during our first rounds of sampling. We were seeing pretty consistent Conservative leads across the board, and the end result ended up being a 10,000, 11,000 majority. And so when the result lands at that kind of margin of victory, you can find out pretty quickly actually what's going on and roughly the order of the different parties. In closer races, you won't find out till much later. It's actually a very imperfect science, voter sampling. I know of one constituency in this election where Labour won by a few hundred, where they spent most of that sampling thinking that they were behind. When it is a close race, the next time that you may find out and figure out who's won is when the counters order all of the ballots in their respective parties in very usefully labelled clumps of 500 votes. And so with a quick scan of those tables, you can usually tell the margins and the more precise percentages of the final result. In very, very close races, then this may not even be that easy to do by sight. And so there will be some races in which candidates only find out the final result when the returning officer invites you all back into a rather dusty cupboard in the back of the sports hall to tell you the exact totals. And that is, of course, the point where candidates and their agents can ask for a recount if it's very, very close. But in our race in Richmond Northallerton, the result was decisive enough that we found out maybe a couple of hours before the actual result was announced on television.
So much like the actual election night itself, at the very end, once things have dragged on for a while, you'll find out the final vote total for Count Binface and how well I did. But before then, I want to have a little look at the actual statistics. I've got all the numbers from the election now. Done a bit of analysis, very proud. And we're going to have a look at the website I told you to look at before the election that was using the polling data. Now we can find out how accurate they were.
Democracy.
I have analysed the vote count from all 650 constituencies in the UK, and what's interesting about that is I'm recording this video on Wednesday the 10th of July. It should go out tomorrow on Thursday the 11th. The official data is not released until Friday the 12th because a bunch of councils dragged their feet on confirming things. But the numbers are out there because they were announced at the election. So I wrote some terrible Python code to go and scrape the results from a variety of web pages to make my own data set of all the votes from the 2024 UK general election, just so I can make this video and get you some fresh data immediately. Specifically, we're going to look at the Liberal Democrats. You may remember from the previous video, they sent me 15, eventually 16 bits of promotional material through my letterbox before the election, and we're going to compare them to Reform, who sent me a single flyer before the election. Now, the Lib Dems, I managed to sum every single vote they got in all the constituencies, and I got a total of 3,506,993. I may be a little off because, again, the data is not 100% finalized. 3.5 million votes. A decent number of votes. Reform, here we go, these are all the Reform totals, got 4,111,808 by my count. So you can say Reform got more votes, which shocked a lot of people. Reform got 4.1 million votes. The Lib Dems got 3.5 million votes. The Lib Dems, however, got 72 seats in Parliament. Decent showing. Reform got 5. A lot of people have been shocked by this because the Lib Dems got fewer votes than Reform, but they got over 14 times as many seats in Parliament. And a lot of people are rightfully saying this is the result of first past the post. Because, and I mentioned this in the previous video, a lot of people are voting strategically and it's a winner takes all. Whoever gets the most votes gets that seat in Parliament. And all the votes, in theory, that all the other parties got don't count towards how many seats they got. And people are complaining, saying that's not fair. We should have proportional representation. Reform should have more seats. I have a apolitical issue with that, and it's that we're judging the results by new criteria. Like, we're analyzing the election data according to rules which were not the rules of the election. The election was run as first past the post. The parties ran their campaigns that way. We can't now analyze the data differently. If we'd originally said this election is a proportional election and just the total number of votes you get exactly scales to the number of seats you get, you could argue that the Liberal Democrats would have run a very different campaign and potentially gotten a lot more votes. But you might think that the Liberal Democrats got fewer votes because they weren't worrying about the vote total, they were worrying about the number of seats, and that's why they got a lot of seats. And I do think that, and I think that because I've got the data. Now I've switched to percentage of votes for all of the constituencies. These are all the Lib Dems in column A. These are all the Reform percentages in column B, and I've just ranked them all from biggest to smallest. So you can see Lib Dems in one constituency got 62.7% of the vote. That was their biggest showing, whereas Reform's biggest showing was only 46.1% of the vote. But right down the bottom of all 650 constituencies, you can see Reform is doing a lot better. So, they only ran in 608, but they were still getting a solid 3% at the end. Lib Dems ran in more, and they've got a lower percentage. So I put both of these on plots, which is what you saw up here. So this is from biggest vote share to smallest vote share ranked for Lib Dem, and you can see this weird hump. So there's a bunch up here that's kind of linear-ish. You hit about here and there's quite a sharp drop-off, and this looks like a decay. Boom, straight down. And almost immediately after the 200 constituencies is below 10%. Now on the same scale down here we have Reform. They haven't got this same shoulder. There's no hump at the beginning. It's the same decay pattern as up here, but instead of starting after this little linear shoulder and then the decay happens straight away. But that said, it decays a lot less. So it stays above, like it's nearly 20% by the time it gets to 200, and it stays above 10% for twice as far, way out here. If I put both of these on the same plot, you can see that initially Lib Dems get way more views, but then later on, Reform get way more views. And I think that shows to different campaign strategies. The Lib Dems piled all their effort into a small number of constituencies where they were likely to win a seat. They went all out for maximizing the number of seats, whereas Reform seemingly put equal effort into every constituency. And the fact that I got a single flyer from them bears that out. For completeness, this is the 42.5% line, which for any constituency is the average threshold required to get a seat in Parliament. And you can see how many more constituencies the Lib Dems have way above, or at least near that line. And you can see why Reform got so few seats, even though in theory, the areas under these two curves is roughly the same. So I do agree, it's a startling stat that Reform, a new party, got so many votes. They got more votes than the Lib Dems. However, now I've looked at their strategies, which I think is absolutely borne out in the data. I can say pretty comprehensively that's because the Lib Dems were playing the game by the rules that have been set in advance. They weren't going for a big showy stat that they could then parade around afterwards.
Democracy.
So how accurate were the predictions? I recommended in part 1 of this video that you use a website called This Vote Counts because it's got the word count in it, and I thought it was a pretty good impartial way to look at the predicted results so you could decide how to vote strategically. But I need to put my predictions where my maths is. How good was that website? Well, right before the election, I scraped every single prediction they had. They made predictions for 626 of the constituencies. Now, decide how many of them would you need for them to have correctly predicted the winner in order for you to be impressed. Well, it turns out they correctly predicted the winner in 543 of those, which is 86.7%. 86.7%! That's pretty good. Like, I'm reasonably impressed with that. Of the 83 they got wrong, 73 of them, it was the person they predicted as second place who then won. The 10 kind of outliers, I mean, 2 of them are where there was a new independent, like someone was kicked out of their party for whatever reason and they ran as an independent anyway, and that didn't appear in the polling data from before the election because it happened quite late. And the remaining 8 were cases where, I guess something startling happened. Maybe there was a controversy, maybe there was like late breaking news, there's some kind of fundamental shift. But given they were only wildly out, as in they didn't predict it in their top 2 for 8, at a 626, and in over 86% of the cases they correctly predicted the top candidate, I'm going to say that's pretty good. Like, you could confidently predict the election on that sort of precision. For completeness, here are all the ones where they got them wrong. So this is what my code spat out, because I was, had to scrape the website for the predictions before the election. I then had to scrape the results afterwards, and then I wrote some code to compare them. And this is all the ones with the percentages of what they got where they didn't predict the winner. So there you are. Not bad. B+. First up, the flyer that Dave Rowntree showed us because they weren't happy with the fact they were using council votes, not polling data, to do the prediction. Let's see how it went. In the end, Liberals won with 39.6%. Oh, so more than they were saying. Then Conservatives won with 27.1%, and they've put 27% on the flyer. Oh my goodness. Then Labor beat Greens So Labour got 17% and the Greens got under 4%. So they were way off on those. So maybe they got lucky with Conservatives, but it does show you that the council elections, I mean, in this case, they got the top two right, but they were wildly off on the others. And they didn't have anything for Reform. Reform came out of nowhere and got 11% of the vote. Came in fourth. So there you are. Pros and cons with using local council elections. So how did I do with the BinFace flyer, which yes, exists. This is a physical thing. We got some. I'm so excited to see it. And on the back, there it is. There's my, we get that in focus. That is the graph that I designed. So how close was I? Well, over here, this is the original data that ended up on the graph. And I was so careful to make sure that was all exactly to scale. And my bar chart was Conservatives likely to win, followed by Labour, Reform, Lib Dem and Green. Now, of course, the whole point of the flyer is to encourage people to vote, and you're giving them this data. Arguably, whenever you see one of these charts on a flyer, it's to make people vote differently and change the result compared to the chart that you're showing them. You're like, this is the future that could be, and you can change it. We did not change it. So the results are exactly in that order. With precisely in that order, they are the top 6 parties. Count BinFace did come behind the Greens. Below them were a bunch of other independents and other novelty candidates, but those are the top 6. Nailed it in that order. Percentages are a little bit off. So the Conservative vote wasn't 38%, they actually got 47.5%. Labour got 22.4%, so that's way off. Reform is not bad. Reform got 14.7% of the vote, and on my bar chart, I put 14. And then the rest were pretty accurate, actually. So I had Lib Dems at 10%. They actually got 9%. Greens I had at 5%. They actually got 4.2%. And finally on the flyer, BinFace at 0.3%. Was that accurate? In the tiny sample I did at the beginning of the count, I estimated 0.6%. Was that correct? Was that representative of the entire vote? It's time to find out.
Count BinFace Party, 308.
How about that? I was within 9. I'm so excited. But to wrap up this video with more details about that, we're going to go back to Count BinFace and me on the night of the election.
To BinFace.
Do you remember what my prediction was?
I do indeed, Matt. You predicted a score very precisely of 299, which made me excited because that would have been a BinFace record.
You were excited but skeptical.
I was.
Yes.
But humble.
Humble. No, exactly. And what did you get?
I got a grand total, sir, of 308, a world record in a parliamentary election for an alien.
And I was only 3% off.
Just amazing.
I mean, obviously if I'd been way off, I might not have recorded this part of the video. So hey, what are you gonna do? If you would like to meet Count BinFace, they are on tour this September and October around the UK. I'll put a link in the description. It's the end of the night. You can see it's like 10 to 5 in the morning over there, and you can see BinFace is still down there meeting all of their fantastic fans. Thank you so much for watching this video. It was a huge amount of fun to come and see how the count happens. Now I'm finally, I think, allowed to get my phone out and film here. All the counting assistants have been so friendly and so helpful and answering my questions, even though technically I'm here to be keeping an eye on them. It's been absolutely amazing, and they make this whole thing work, which is phenomenal. And I want to say, if you don't normally watch my videos and you just happen to be watching this one because you're interested in election things, I've got a whole channel with maths and stats and videos like this. So do check out some other videos, and if you watch one or two more that you enjoy, please do consider subscribing to the channel. Oh, and Nico and his buddies are all still making a racket back over there somewhere.